Hey everyone, Gary Simon of CourseCetro.com. It's late at night, people are sleeping, so I'm not going to be too loud today. But anyhow, to develop more robust Angular apps, sometimes it's necessary to integrate Angular, which is the front end, with an actual back end. So one such popular stack for achieving this is the MEAN stack, which is an acronym for MongoDB, Express.js, Angular, and Nodejs. Now, all four of these technologies will allow you to create powerful apps. So the Angular team pushes a lot of updates. So within 2017, Angular will have gone from version 2 to 4 and ultimately 5 here in December. And because of this, it's been difficult for developers to find reliable MEAN configurations and tutorials that will work with the latest versions of Angular. So fortunately, I'm going to be doing a new, right now, tutorial that will provide you with a working MEAN4 and soon MEAN5 stack. And I mean 4 and 5 as in Angular 4 and 5. So let's get started. So the very first thing we need to do is to install Nodejs. Oh, but real quick, before we begin, make sure you check out my site, CourseCetro.com, where you're going to find a bunch of courses on modern design and development. A lot are free, and the others you can access for the cost of buying me like a 6-pack each month. That's it. Now also, it probably wouldn't hurt to subscribe here on YouTube, and be sure to make sure the notifications are turned on. All right, let's get back to it. So one thing you need to do, you may have it installed already. Maybe, it's something you haven't used in a while. Either way, open up your console or your command line and type in node-v. So for me, it's giving me a version number, which means I do have it. Now, if it goes unrecognized, you're going to need to visit nodejs.org and visit downloads. And depending on your OS, go ahead and install the appropriate installation package. And once it's done and finished installing, which will give you access to the Node Package Manager, which we're going to use momentarily, reload your console or command line and just run node-v, and it should be all set up. And so that's how you install Node. Node.js. So in MEAN, the very last letter, N acronym is for Node, and that's all you have to do with that. So now we need to install Angular. So we're going to use the Angular CLI or command line interface to create our Angular app. So let's install it at the command line through npm. So npm install add Angular CLI-G for global. So we only have to do this once. So I already did this, so I'm not going to run the command, but go ahead and run it if you haven't or if it's been a while. So then we're going to use it, and the way we do this is through ng, new, as in a new project, and then the actual name of the project. So MEAN. All right, so it takes a little bit of time. I'm just going to go ahead and pause. All right, and once that is finished, we're going to hop into it. So cd MEAN. All right, and now once we're in the new project folder, we're going to run a command with the Angular CLI that will create a build of our project. Now we need to do this because our Express server is going to look for a dist or distribution folder to serve the file. So it's just something we want to do now to get out of the way, even though we just have this starter template set up from the CLI. So ng build, and it'll take maybe just a few seconds to do this. Come on. There we go. All right. So now we have, the Node.js and the Angular part, or the N and the A of MEAN, pretty much ready to go and set up. So now the next step is to set up Express.js. So while we're still inside of the project folder here, we're going to run npm install express and also body-parser. And we're going to save to our package.json file as a dependency. All right, so it's going to install the Express server package and body parser, which is a middleware for parsing incoming requests bodies. And you'll see how that works in a little bit. All right, so now once that is complete, we're going to hop into our code editor for the first time. And mine happens to be Visual Studio Code. All right, so here we are in our new MEAN folder, and we want to create a new file called server.js. Okay, so first we're going to declare a few constants. And while I do this, I'm not going to be typing everything character by character because that will take quite a while, but I will do just very, very, very basic explanation as in terms of what's happening. And also just for your reference, you can visit, if you're watching this on YouTube, the link in the description, which will take you to the written tutorial that has all this code and all the examples so that you don't have to sit there and type this as well. So the very first thing is to define some constants here. And let me increase the font size just a tad bit. So we have Express we're importing, which you used npm to install, as well as body parser. And then we also have path and HTTP, which were also installed when we installed these two up here. And then we're creating our constant app, which binds it to our Express server. All right. So the next section is we're going to have an API file for interacting with MongoDB. And that is this line right here on line 8. Next, we have parsers. And then this is where body parser comes in. We can see it was defined up here. And then next we have the dist folder location, which is generated when we run ng build, which we already did. So we're saying basically look for the path of dist right here. We also have the API location, which is going to be /API, and we pass an API up here. This doesn't yet exist, this file and these folder structures, which will momentarily after we're done with this. Then we're going to send all the other requests to the Angular app, which is index.html. Then we're going to send, and then we're going to set the port right here. Sorry about that. Copy and paste the wrong thing. There we go. Set the port right here. And then we create a constant of server and then server listen down here, which will in the console running on localhost, and the port, of course, is set to 3000. And that's all. So let's go ahead and save this. And we're going to now set up the MongoDB. And now you have two options here for setting up MongoDB. You can either use like a database as a service, something like from mlab.com, or you can set up your own MongoDB locally on the production server. So we're going to set one up locally on the dev environment, which means you need to visit the MongoDB downloads page. All right, so that page is right here. I'm on Windows, so I'm just going to select this one and hit download. I've already done this though, so depending on your OS, make sure you download the right package, installation package, and download it and then install it. It's pretty straightforward. All right, so once you're done with the installation process, then you need to visit the MongoDB installation page. And so I'm just going to copy this, paste this right up here. This is also in the written tutorial, and it's going to show you how to install on Linux, OS X, and on Windows. So on Windows, for instance, it will tell you, interactive installation. Let me come down here. Right here. This is the line that we're concerned with. We need to start MongoDB. So once you install it, you have to start it. And you do this at the command prompt. So I'm going to go back to our thing right here. I'm going to right click at the bottom. I'm using a console emulator called Commander, and it allows you right click, new console, start, and then I'm going to run this right here. Okay, and don't just ignore all this stuff. Nothing really troublesome there. And then we're going to create yet another command prompt or console. And we're going to run mongo.exe. Literally, the only thing that's changing in the two commands that we just ran is the first one was mongod, and this one's mongo.exe. So watch what happens when we run it. It opens up the shell. So this is how we access the shell when we control our database. So once we're in there, we're going to run this command to create a database. It's simply use and then the name of the database. So if I type in use mean, it says switch to DB mean. All right. Now we're not done yet. We need to insert at least one record inside of a collection. So we're going to put in DB and then the name of our collection. In this case, we'll just say users, and then insert, and we put it in as an object, and we'll make the first property here name, make the next one John Doe, and hit enter. And I'll say write result, and now it's ready to go. So we can now run show DBs. All right, you see one I had there before when I was just testing and preparing for this tutorial called MEAN4, and then also our MEAN. Now let's go back to the original command line in our project folder, and we're going to use npm to install MongoDB and save it as a dependency. And then once we're finished with that, I'll just let that run. We're going to go back to our code editor, and we're going to come back and we're going to create a server folder. Inside of there, we're going to create another folder called routes. And inside of this folder, routes folder right there, we're going to name another one called API.js. All right. So if I go back real quick to, we can see it's ready to go. All right, so inside of API.js, we're going to have a few different imports, or constants rather. All right, so the first one here, we are importing Express once again, our router from Express router, the Mongo client, and an object ID. This is useful for when we're inserting or creating data inside of our database. So the first thing we want to do is connect. So to do that, we have this line, or the series of line from 7 to 13 right here. And all it's doing is connecting to this location right here. Notice that we have /MEAN. That is the name of the database that we want to connect to. We're also going to have error handling and also response handling right here. And then we're going to define our first endpoint. We're going to call it users. So the way we do this will be, for instance, for getting all of the users and like displaying them. All right, so when it comes to create, read, update for a CRUD app, this would be read. So router get /users. So in the browser, we can access this by going to, momentarily when we run the server, localhost 3000 /API, and that's defined right here, and then / whatever it says here, users. So then we have the collection, we have db to collection in users, and this is defined when we ran that db.users.insert command. And then we're using .find to array, and then we take the response of users and set the response data users and response in JSON format from the response. So this is successful, and this is if there's an error. All right, and then one last final line is module exports router, and we're doing this because we're importing it from our server.js file. All right, and then we'll save. Now let's give this a go. We're going to go back to here and run node server. Now it should say running on localhost 3000. We'll go back to here. All right, and localhost 3000 /API /users. All right, so for me, it's showing more than just one result, and that's simply because I ran this before when I was testing. So I had John Doe 2, John Doe 3, or whatever. So if you wanted to go back, for instance, to right here, and then just run db users insert John Doe. Let me change this to Jane. And we'll go back, refresh. We can see there is Jane Doe right here. Okay, so now that's how you set up, and get all four of those technologies running. But how exactly do we communicate this data that we're fetching from MongoDB to the front end of Angular? Well, let's go ahead and create a service file for doing just that. So I'm going to go back here. I'm going to, well, let's create a fourth. New console, cd code, mean, and we're going to run ng, which is the Angular command line interface, ng for generate, the type of service, and the name, we'll just call it data. All right, let's go back to our code editor, Control B, get our sides here. We're in app, and then we can see our data service.ts file. Okay, so to get this working correctly, we have to add a couple of imports at the top. So we're going to be importing HTTP headers, request options, and also RxJS map operator. And you'll see how these two things come into play momentarily. We're also going to define a property of result type any, and then through dependency injection, we have to create an instance of our HTTP. And then we're going to create a method. So we're going to say get users. And we're going to return this .http get, and then that API endpoint that we visited in the browser. So API users. And then we use the map operator. We take the response as a result to do this .result equals result.json. We only want the data field, because if we go back to our API, we'll see that we have let response equals status data message. We only want this guy right here. So we'll say .data. Save it. Then before we can import this and use it in any component, we're going to go to our app module file, and we have to import that along with the HTTP module. So to do that, we're going to import both of those. I'm going to copy this off screen. So we have our HTTP module here and our data service there. Data service goes in our providers array, and HTTP module goes into the import array. We'll save that. And then we go to our app component TS file, which is the one that starts and loads by default. So once again, we're going to import our data service, and we're going to use dependency injection, get an instance of the data service through our constructor. All right. Get rid of this title right here. We're going to say users of array any. And then this is where we access the data services get users method that we defined. So this dot data service, and then we can see get users right there. And then we subscribe to it. The response of being this dot users equals response. And there we go. Now we're going to visit the template, which is app component.html. Let's just gut everything here. Put in h1, our MongoDB is working. And then we'll create an unordered list. And we'll use the ng4 directive, let user of users, to iterate through each of these. And then user, and then the property we gave it was name. And then save it. So we're going to go back to the console now. We're going to run ng build. All right, that's finished. Come over here. I'm not sure if we made a change to the server, but just in case we did, let's rerun it. And then let's go back. And now we can just go to localhost 3000. And there we go. Out. I said out. Should be our. But yeah, our MongoDB is working, and here's all of the entries. And we can see Jane Doe there was the last. All right, so just to talk about, going further, because obviously when you create an app, you're going to want, to do more than just reading. You're going to want to do the other CRUD operations like creating, updating, deleting. So I'm not going to go over that here. But the general rule of thumb, in terms of what it takes to do that, it might be easiest if I just bring this over here and kind of just go along with you about going further. I'm going to increase this just a bit. So basically, oops, I'm in the troubleshooting. My computer's lagging. All right, so to handle creation, updating, deleting, the steps usually are as follows. We want to modify the server routes API.js file to include a new endpoint for either creating, updating, or deleting, depending on what we want to do. So that, going back to that real quick, it's this file right here. So, this is for get users. We might have another one for updating. And the syntax is all pretty similar with just some slight differences based on what you want to do. So I'm not going to go over those, but you can use Google just to find out and figure out how to write this code. And you would do a search term like Angular, MongoDB updating in Nodejs or something like that. You'll find examples. It's easy to get started. And then the next step would be to come to the data service and then create a method to return, and using this HTTP get API users, and then map it, and then you go to whichever component you want, you reference it through the data service, and do whatever you want, and set up the template however you want based on what you're doing. And so yeah, that's basically it. You will probably run into true troubleshooting problems because there's a lot happening here. Usually, if that's the case, you start with your API file and you head on over to your browser into localhost 3000 /API / the endpoint, just to see and make sure that you're actually getting the correct response that you want. If you're not, the problem is probably somewhere in here. You have a typo, whatever. If you do, but there's still a problem and you're not getting the results you want, there might be an issue in your data service file. I would take a look there. If this is correct, then you want to check out your component and what you did to implement that given method. And then if it's fine here, finally check out your template file to make sure you're using correct property names and all of that. All right, so I'm Gary Simon of CourseCetro.com, and I'll talk to you guys later.